This is the People and Planet podcast, where we share stories from around the world about what is it that we can do to not only heal our planet, but to heal ourselves. My name is Alexandra Guerra. I'm an entrepreneur in the climate change space, and I believe that we must absolutely address what is stopping us from healing ourselves as people and societies and communities in order for us to enact real global change, whether it's economical or climate change. This is a hobby project for me, and I hope you enjoy it. If there's something in particular you'd like to hear about, please feel free to reach out to us. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the People and Planet podcast. My name is Alexandra Guerra, your host, and today I have an amazing guest and friend, Diego Saez Gil. Hey, Diego.
Hey, Alexandra, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good. How are you doing? There's the coronavirus, there's our companies, there's a lot going on in the world today.
Yes, I am. Well, I am trying to stay calm and peaceful and with a clear mind. And here hanging out in the forest.
Yeah, where is this forest? They look like redwoods.
Yeah, this is where I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I have a cabin in the forest in California, and very fortunate to be surrounded by these ancient redwood trees.
I'm in Florida. This is my little jungle, but it's really not. It's just it's the backyard.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we get lots of birds, so hopefully they're not too distracting. I like to listen to them. This is where I meditate in the morning and I try to do my yoga, but sometimes
Amazing.
the mosquitoes get to me. So
beautiful.
I'm really glad that you're here because you're probably the second person that I told this podcast or told the idea about this podcast to, and was really glad that you were enthusiastic to participate.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. So a quick run through for people who are just listening in. I have a company called Nori. It's focused on climate change. And we have a podcast called Reversing Climate Change. And we focus on essentially the innovations and entrepreneurs developing solutions to climate change was the intro music. And every time we have that podcast, I'm like, God, there's just more I want to talk about. For example, Diego came onto our podcast in episode 104, which I highly recommend. And Lorraine Smith, who was the first guest on this People and Planet podcast, told me it was one of her favorites. It was also probably one of my favorite episodes to do. We first started talking about Diego's company, Pachama, using LiDAR and machine learning, all this techie stuff to solve protecting forests across the world. And then we went into the more spiritual stuff, which I think was a little funny for my colleagues, Christoph and Ross, who were there. Then essentially just became you and I talking about like Eckhart Tolle and the New Earth Awakening. And I've since realized that there's a lot that we need to do in terms of addressing who's like the underlying problem, like getting to the root of the problem, which isn't necessarily we need to address the symptoms of this planetary crisis called climate change, which is like, oh, we're using dirty energy. Yes, but why do we do that? And I think it's everything a layer deeper. Why are we deforesting? Maybe it's because we're not valuing the right things. Maybe it's because and then why under that, right? In software, you have like the 5 whys from Lean Startup. So go why? And my hypothesis is that we're just deeply hurting and don't really understand or are connected enough to Mother Earth and the environment in general to care enough about people and planet. And hopefully through sharing conversations like on this podcast, we can address that. So with that, maybe you tell us a little bit about your story, Diego, and introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. I agree with that assessment. But yes, about myself, I was born and raised in the north of Argentina, in an area with a lot of nature. It's actually the last tip of the Amazon rainforest type of ecosystems. It's called a Yunga forest. Grew up surrounded by that beautiful environment in the province of Tucumán. And after I finished school, I went into this, what I call an outward journey of looking to learn from the world. And that led me to Europe, where I did my master's, then led me to the US, where I became an entrepreneur, and where, in a way, I enter into this rat race of becoming successful with my company, and what most people are doing in the West today, which is just trying to be successful, trying to do more and get more, right? And all that ended up in a moment of personal crisis in which I was, really questioning myself. What am I doing? I am just contributing to this system that is destroying the planet, that is causing climate change, and that is making us all unhappy and unhealthy. And that led me to a switch of direction on my searches, and I decided to, instead of looking outwards, start looking inward. And that led me to reconnecting with nature, and did a trip with my brothers to the Amazon rainforest that was very enlightening. Then got into meditation, got into a lot of practices that could help me reconnect with deeper self and with the planet at large. And then from that journey of introspection, I ended up starting this new project called Pachama, which is a startup. It's a technology startup in which we are harnessing the latest technologies, as you were mentioning at the beginning, but at the service of the healing and regeneration of our planet, with the intention of helping solve climate change, but even beyond that, protecting our living planet, the only home we know. And and yes, I agree with you. When you came to me with this idea of making a podcast that is not just about how to solve climate change, which is a topic that I am very interested in. I've been in other podcasts and in other conversations about how to use technology to solve climate change, how to, use entrepreneurial energy and Silicon Valley to at the service of fixing climate change. I also deeply believe that we have to work on the deeper causes of what got us into this problem in the first place. And climate change is just one of the problems that we will have to deal as a result of uh, living in this system that has all this momentum, that is destroying the planet, disconnecting us with each other, and that if we continue in this direction, it's going to lead to collapse, unfortunately. And the deeper causes, to me, are what we spoke many times: the identification with the ego, a very individualistic way of seeing the world, as opposed to awakening to the true reality of the deep interconnectedness, the interbeingness between all humans and all living beings on the planet. And uh, the realization that we are all Mother Nature, we are all planet Earth, we are children of planet Earth, and therefore we should be acting not focus on selfish goals, but on how do we continue caring and protecting this planet for future generations. So yes, that's who I am, and
Yeah,
answering what you mentioned.
yeah. I love it that you bring this up because so there's a couple things that I want to talk about. You talk about the ego. You talked about us being all planet Earth, and maybe in those two things, I think is very yin and yang. Like, yeah, we are individuals, but we're also not at all individuals. So we're all one, and I'm trying to appreciate that a little more. But it's difficult. So, you and I might be coming from a completely different perspective from other people. You and I are very similar, and we're super ambitious. Like you left home, I left home. You studied abroad. You left Argentina, studied abroad, became an entrepreneur. I left Miami and I lived all over the U.S. Became an entrepreneur. work all the time, always wanting to achieve, achieve, and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
We have that similar archetype, and then like you know realize that there was more to it. It wasn't all
Mm-hmm.
about the achievement or the monetary success or accolades, and that we needed to reconnect and protect this earth. So, but then there's a bunch of other archetypes out there, right? A bunch of other people and priorities in life. And I often wonder, like, how do I help in getting or like well, not even me because again that's the ego, right? That's like me saying I can help people, but what is it that needs to be done in order for people who are really concerned about climate change and to get involved, or just like concerned about the planet, to care when really they have like 3 kids, they have a job, they have like this is like so like is it maybe just spending 5 minutes of meditation? Like it's really difficult to and maybe I'm asking too much from one podcast conversation, but it's really difficult to like engage in these conversations for me, like with my grandparents. I'm living with them now, and my parents and my cousins and my aunts and uncles, and they all just have like different lives. And I think sometimes I say, oh yeah, I meditate in the morning, I do my yoga, and I can see them looking at me like, you just have such a like a different
Mm.
life. And yeah, because I'm have less ties. But now I'm rambling. But this is what I'm trying to get to is that we need. I agree with you. We need to reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we allow everyone to reconnect without feeling like they have to take long sabbaticals like you did,
Yeah.
or 4 weeks off like I did in December to reconnect?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the majority of people in the West, the majority of people in the US, um, there is a lot of suffering. Sometimes that suffering is anxiety, depression, is disconnection, lack of purpose, lack of motivation, and
Mm-hmm.
all those are many people are looking for answers. Unfortunately, this system, the answer to these problems many times is antidepressants or things like that. And I think that the answers to how we are going to heal the planet are actually probably the same as the answer of how do we heal ourselves, right?
Yes.
which which is reconnecting, as you say, with who we truly are, with our true nature. And our true nature is interconnectedness, is inner peace. And I am seeing uh, a spread of all these wisdoms, right? We live in this incredible time in history in which, through YouTube, through so many other online
Through
platforms,
podcasts?
through podcast, and through the internet in general, we can have access to all these wisdoms. And I am seeing a spread of the wisdom of the East, the wisdom of the indigenous people, spreading more and more and reaching more and more people that resonate with these messages, that find answers and pointers on where to look for, for the path, right? um, and yes, it's going to take time. Some people are going to be focused on short-term problems, but as civilization continue facing these challenges, and today we're facing coronavirus, uh, we are going to continue seeing in the coming decades that that the system that we are running, both as a civilization and as small communities and ourselves, uh, are off track, right? And as these realities become evident, undeniable, we will inevitably have to find for answers, right? And the answers are not going to be the same for everyone. Not everyone has to sit and meditate and do a meditation retreat, or do sacred plants in the Amazon or things like that. But we all have to remember who we are, and I think it's happening. Sometimes it might feel like it's not, because we look at the leaders that we have in countries like the US and Brazil, and it doesn't seem
Mm-hmm.
that we are advancing consciousness. But I think it's a silent evolution that is actually happening. The question is whether that consciousness evolution spread is going to happen on time before we the system has so much momentum on the direction of
Yeah.
collapse, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you're touching on a lot of things, and I really want to highlight what you said is that the answer, the solution to healing our planet is healing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And changing fundamentally how we run as a civilization, as societies, and a global economy. And all these things have contributed to it, like capitalism, the desire for consumer goods, more and more electronics. Like I have so many. I have like a air like what is this, like a mouse pad? I've got like the keyboard here, and I've got like my phone there, like all these things, AirPods, and I'm using them, sure. But what if instead of using them and thinking, okay, well, like I'm just going to like feed into it, like, okay, what if I use these things for good? And this is just an idea that sparked while listening to you talk, which is, well, we have podcasts, we have YouTube, we have this ability to talk on the phone, WhatsApp all the time. You and I share voice memos all the time. Um, and what if we actually use the thing that got us here in this yucky place to solve it and maybe scale back our consumption
Mm-hmm.
a little bit or a lot, or like our need for more? And I moved from Seattle to here. I was helping my cousin move very briefly before we started recording this podcast, and there are things that we just throw away that to me I'm like, I always hate moving because it just forces me to look at the things that I have accumulated
Yeah.
and never needed or used, and then I throw them away, and like I know that this is valuable to someone else. And I wish that our system wasn't so linear, where it was like, okay, now I have this drying rack, I'm not going to use it anymore, and like it's too much effort for me to find someone who wants it, so I'm just going to throw it away and it's going to go to landfill. And it blows my mind. So with that being said, and the desire for me more recently to bridge the gap between those two worlds. So if we're talking about linear, what I mean is, or let's just go this way, there's a place that you take resources from. You extract them, you process them, whatever. You create something, you ship them, and then they get consumed over here. Let's use the perfect example of extracting from South America, foods, goods, whatever, and then transporting over to the U.S. and then U.S. citizens consuming them here. Even if we could talk about like avocados or produce, like the waste, the nutrients of that goes into our land. So we literally just kind of like vampires sucking out of certain land areas into other places. It's completely linear.
Mm.
And even our exchange of information. And I think that along this entire path, there are people, and if these people started talking to each other more and connecting back to the source, then maybe they would realize that there are these internal like recycling. I don't know. This is literally the vision I had as you were talking.
Yeah, you're touching a few points that I think about. First, in terms of consumerism and consumption, you know, what's interesting is it turns out that it's being over and over demonstrated by now, I think, and we can prove it in our own lives, that material things don't make us happier, right? So that was, you know, the if you look at the history of the US after the Second War, there was this kind of like national plan to revamp the economy, and that meant uh, telling people to consume and buy more things and change your car model every year and buy more appliances to your house. And then industrial designers had to design new appliances so that people could buy more stuff. And that was what was going to get the US back on its feet and lead the world, right? And then everybody started copying the American model, right? The Japanese copied the American model, the Koreans did, the Europeans and South America. Everybody's just copying this model of
Yeah.
uh, consumerism and production and extraction, and all the countries need to grow GDP, all the companies need to grow revenue and shareholder value, all the people need to grow their income and their net worth, right? That model, if you, at whatever rate of growth you extrapolate it into the future, leads to collapse in a planetary system that has limited resources, right? You cannot sustain linear extractive models in a limited resource container. That is just basic math. So
Right.
unfortunately, that paradigm of consumption with an extractive model and of unlimited growth, in which you are in a way outsourcing the cost, the environmental cost, not accounting for the environmental cost of all this production, you will lead to collapse, right? So at a systemic level, we need to redesign this because it's definitely unsustainable. And at the personal level, we need to realize, wait, buying another appliance, another electronic, and another whatever is not going to make me happier. So I think at the personal level, it has to start with the realization that minimalism is actually what leads to happiness. The less things you have, the less complications in your life, and the more happiness actually. So those are the type of root causes that need to be thought about when we are thinking about solving climate change. It's not just how we're going to remove carbon from the atmosphere, which is important. Unfortunately, we will have to do it, but
Yes.
it's how do we stop running a system that is so uh, just unsustainable by design.
But even that, even you talking about how do we, do systematic change, how do we completely disrupt it, redesign it, that's overwhelming for me.
Hmm.
I what am I supposed to do with that like information? It's good insight. I'm not
Hmm.
I'm not
Sure.
validating your insight, but it's I guess what my question is like, what are the things that we can do? And maybe you've thought of this, maybe you haven't, and we can spitball here. But what are the things that we can do as individuals?
Hmm.
Keeping in mind that different individuals have different resources, abilities, and interests.
Well, as I was saying, at the individual level, I think we had to change our lifestyles, and I did a big shift of lifestyle myself. Well, first I became vegetarian, which for an Argentinian, taking meat from an Argentinian is like taking vodka from a Russian, right?
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but I became a vegetarian. I'm a very happy vegetarian. I'm on my way to becoming a vegan as well. I decided to become a minimalist and just buy the minimum number of stuff, and I switched to an electric car. So there's a lot of things, individual choices that we can make to reduce our impact and to not be part of a system that we don't believe in, right? Second of, and in doing so, I think we show example, and I'm seeing some friends and family around me who are seeing the way that me and my brothers are changing our lifestyles, and they get inspired, and then they follow, right? So I think that's one of the things that I think is important to do at an individual level, and then just talk about this and influence whatever our place in the world is. We can influence the way that things get designed, and the way that civilization gets designed. I think as entrepreneurs in the technology world, that's a big place to influence. But if you are in politics, if you are in education, if you are in any sort of subsystem of the system of civilization, you can help influence things on the direction of a regenerative circular system for the planet.
Yeah. So for people who are listening who are not in like the corporate space, so Diego and I like go to the same conferences and like pitch to the same customers sometimes. Who and the terms regenerative and circular are something that are used to describe, changing your supply chain. Like if you're a big corporation like I don't know Amazon or Microsoft, like where are you buying raw materials from, where are you producing, and then how do you turn this really linear system into more circular and regenerative, so that you reduce on waste, reduce your impact, maybe have a positive impact. So just for reference for others. But even a layer deeper than that, Diego, I'm wondering, let's go back to what you said in the beginning, which was in order to heal our planet, we have to heal ourselves. What are the things that we can do to heal ourselves?
Yeah, I mentioned before to you this writer Joanna Macy,
Mm-hmm.
who is a Buddhist teacher, an eco philosopher, and just a very deep thinker on what she calls the great turning, which is an idea that I love, which is that we might be in this, we are in these very uncertain times in which, very difficult to know what will happen. There's a big likelihood that if we continue like we are, we will, civilization could collapse and there could be a lot of suffering. But at the same time, we are in a moment in which we could do a great turning and build a more enlightened civilization, right? And there's she has several books that I highly recommend. There is one called Active Hope, which is about how to think about this environmental and climate crisis that we're living. And she talks about this moving beyond the identification with your skin bounded ego, believing that I am Diego, and moving into a more expanded view of yourself. See yourself as part of an interconnected humanity. See yourself as part of planet Earth, of Mother Nature, right? And when we start identifying ourselves with that expanded identity, we start also acting differently and being part of the solution. I
Yeah.
think that is kind of like the spiritual uh, sort of like shift that needs to happen, and it's what all the philosophies and spiritualities of ancient civilizations point towards, right? The fact that who we are is not who we think we are. Who we are is actually something a lot wider.
Yeah, this is sounds real. This Joanna Mesa, you said her name is.
Yes.
It sounds really similar to the New Earth Awakening book written by Eckhart Tolle, which was what I mentioned on that podcast that you and I were talking about. Eckhart Tolle also wrote The Power of Now, which talks about being present. But New Earth Awakening is different, where it touches more on what you're discussing now, which is um, we are at a new point in our evolution as a species to change, to kind of
Yeah.
adapt or die. And
Right.
that change, what it looks like, is kind of maybe dissolving the ego a little bit by recognizing that, yeah, we are all one.
Mm-hmm.
These boundaries, these distances are illusionary.
Yeah.
Um, this is my twist on it. He doesn't exactly say this, um, but he does say like our ego are the things that we identify with. I'm a founder. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm Cuban. I live in Miami, and
Mm-hmm.
I lived all over the U.S. Da, da, da. I like to travel. Those are just like these labels.
Yeah.
That's not really who I am. Who I am is like the being, the awareness of the thoughts. And I can have a thought, but I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
identify that with that thought. So it sounds very, very
Yeah.
similar. Um, but that takes a lot. And like I've tried to share the New Earth Awakening with like some friends and family members, and they're like, I can't. It's too much. It's too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. Like it almost takes like, because I've heard things like this before. I've heard,
Yeah.
for example, I heard Wayne Dyer talk on Oprah's podcast in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was the Super Soul Conversations, and he's talking about Taoism, the Tao Te Ching.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh my God. And I loved that podcast. I would listen to it all the time, every episode, and loved it. And I remember listening to Wayne Dyer, and he talks about how the words I am are super important because I am is is the name of God. Like when Moses asked God, what is your name? Or what is your name? He goes, I am that I am. And so when you say the words I am, it's a mantra that is very similar that says you are God, and whatever follows that you have to be very careful with. Right. So if you say I am sad, you are essentially calling your power to say you are sad, and it's like this thing. You don't want to do that. But anyways, now I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
When I first listened to him on that podcast, I was so like, ugh, I listened to maybe half of it, and I couldn't. So even when I share like, but now I'm at a different point. I can listen to Wayne Dyer, and I go through Wayne Dyer stuff all the time. I'm going through so many books with Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, him describing it, and really resonating with me.
Yeah.
But like maybe like there's something in between, or maybe it's just don't force it. Just let people get to the point when they can listen to Eckhart Tolle and understand and feel like it's useful.
Yeah, I think we all go through our personal journeys, and sometimes we have to go through through periods of confusion and losing track. I told you my personal story, and I did go into this direction of confusion. I was not only uh, uh, a consumer on the consumerist society. I was a producer on the consumerist machine, right?
Mm.
And I think you had to, from a depth psychology perspective, you had to go through your own hero's journey, and through your own moments of darkness, and that's how you at some point have a crash that hopefully after that crash you find your true path, right? So each person has a different process, a different journey, different stages, and I think that the way that we can support each other in community is just by being the mentors of each other along the journey. And when someone is needing that help, and again, I'm using the archetype of the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, right, on this idea that has the mentors and the helpers along the way. We can be, I had a lot of mentors and helpers along my journey, and we can be the mentors and helpers of others, right? So we are all in a way walking each other towards that path of light, that path of true north, that path of purpose, that path of reconnection with connecting to that awakening that we're talking about. But each person, we have to respect that each person is on their own stage.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I think I knew that, but I like sometimes you just get so caught up. Like I can listen to a friend, and I'm sure my parents, I for sure know that people have listened to me and been like, I really have the answer for you if you just did this thing. And then I really appreciate that they don't tell me, that they just let me figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
Because that's just how it is. I guess that's how it'll be when everybody like becomes a parent. It's like, yeah, my kid is gonna fall. My kid is gonna do something, but I just gotta let them learn that
Yeah.
lesson for themselves.
Now, one thing I had to say is that if you look at almost all ancient societies, especially nature-based societies, which was the norm for the majority of human history, had these rites of passage, as they call them, right? So the youth, when they were going to become adults, generally the elders and the adults would take the youth into this rite of initiation or rite of passage, in which they had to go through an ordeal or some form of
Mm-hmm.
time in nature alone, and this type of ceremonial ways of reconnecting with or connecting with your true call, with your true uh, purpose. And then the youth will come back to the village with clarity about what their place in the community was. We don't have that, right? Our rites of passage in the modern Western society are going to spring break trips to Cancun, right? Or things like that.
Oh,
So unfortunately, we are in a society that forgot the importance of walking people towards the path of becoming true adults, right? And we had to come up with new ways of doing that. We had to self-administer our rites of passage to reconnecting with our true purpose, and we had to help others along the way. Um, but it is true that this is part of the problems of our society as well, right? That in this individualistic uh, industrial society that we built, we lost this type of uh, tools, let's say.
I think it's because of what I was describing earlier, which is that linear process, which is we're so like in the U.S. we're so far removed from where things come from,
Mm,
and um, we're also very individual,
mm,
like and independent.
mm,
Um, even in communities that are tight. For example, I had to ask my cousin 5 times, like, "Do you need help? Do you need help moving?" She's moving out of her house today,
mm,
and like she just kept brushing me off until last minute last night. She's like, "Oh yeah, can you come in the morning?" And so yeah, I'll come help you. And like this is my ride or die. Like this is my best friend, my prima. Like we've grown up and we do everything
yeah.
together. Um, And so, whereas like I'm sure because I've traveled a lot, like I can go to other places and see the strength of community be really deep. Where it's like it's not even a thing. Like here in the U.S., it's so strange. Like to ask a friend to help you move or ask your friend to do you a favor, it's like, oh, it's such a burden. Oh, I don't want to be a burden. I
Mm,
don't know how many times I have conversations with friends about how they don't want to feel like a burden to me, and I'm like, you're not a what is this? Like, when did like our friendship become like conditional on you making me always happy? Like, we're not always. It's like a relationship,
yeah,
right? Communities and friendships are built off of relationships, and relationships aren't always going to be perfect.
yeah,
But like, you do it. Like, you're like, okay, this is a relationship I want to keep. And maybe the problem is too that we're too disposable with our relationships. We're too disposable like with like who we let in, who we let out, like online dating, all the things. It just
yeah.
I need to chill because I'm gonna get on a rant of negativity. But
Well,
I think
taking on that point, I do think that the new earth that we want to build will be a lot more focused on communities, and local communities that help each other out, right? Which is the way that civilization, that humanity was for millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. We lived in villages, in small communities, identify with these communities, and then this. Again, modern industrial society alienated us, made us just part of this very large um, containers that are the states and the countries and big cities, and tiny apartments in huge buildings. And another thing that Yuval Harari talks in his book *Sapiens* is this the idea of each children having their own room is something that started in the US, right? And it wasn't the case. I grew up in Argentina sharing a room with my two brothers, right? Until we were teenagers and when we left home, right? Here in the US, it's so common that each kid has a room, right? And then since you're a child, you are okay. This is my space. I'm an individual. I'm disconnected from even from my family, right? And you hid yourself in your room, right? So that has led us to this too, to this isolation, um, depression because we feel disconnected, and lack of true community. And unfortunately, in the face of these challenges such as coronavirus and climate change and natural disasters, community is and solidarity and community is what actually give us resilience and keep us together in front of these challenges. So we gonna have to kind of learn that again. And probably it's gonna have to be the hard way as we face this crisis. But in the new civilization that we hope to help build, communities are gonna be a big part, I believe.
hmm, there's a lot of truth to what you just said, and the question that comes to mind is like, okay, well, what does that look like? I mean, because and it's everything's a long road, right? Like nothing can be solved overnight. So this is obvious. We're
Hmm.
not children. Um, but like what are the things, maybe reverse engineering, how do we get to that point where people aren't so individualistic or look
Hmm.
out for themselves? Like it's strange, like in different places people have different affinities or
Hmm.
desires to like even say hello. I've been in Seattle for 2.5 years. I just moved back to Miami, and people in Seattle, like if I'm running or going for a walk, which I do every day,
Hmm.
they'll like look at me and okay,
Hmm.
they'll like look at me as that's how they acknowledge I'm there.
Hmm.
And even coming back to Miami, which is a lot more Latin, like, I
Hmm.
mean, we've got Brazilians and Dominicans and
Yeah.
Cubans, Peruvians, everything. We got everything.
Hmm.
Argentinians.
Yeah.
Um, and I go for walks every night. And as soon as someone's up, hey, hi, and I'm like, hi, like I even forgot
Yeah.
because I haven't lived here really in 12 years. But like, yeah, hi, we can sit and we can talk.
Yeah.
Um, and I just wonder, like, I don't know, like, how do we get there? Maybe it's just that we keep talking about it and doing our part and like
Yeah.
spreading the joy of talking to each other.
Yes, and it's up for our generation as well that are starting to decide how we want to live the rest of our lives to making choices based on these new ideas and these new paradigms, right? So again, the paradigm of the baby boomers that return from war and their children was, the the individual house on the suburbs, right? And like this very individualistic way of looking at the yeah, suburban American life, right? And maybe we have to start building different types of communities, and in which I'm seeing more and more here in California, people that several families move together into one property and maybe have several houses, and then it's almost like a community or like a collective living, right? There's a lot of collective living here in the Bay Area, sometimes even in houses in San Francisco, or collectives of houses in a forest area like here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I have many friends who are exploring these ideas of like, hey, let's just live together, several couples, several families. And there is actually a whole movement of eco villages and regenerative communities around the world that are thinking new ways of living, right? Moving beyond the idea of the nuclear family into ideas of communities.
Community.
In the Nordic countries as well, in Norway, I think they have these collective houses in which people take turn to take care of the kids, the elderly, like the grandparents take care of the children, and they cook together. They many communities in which there are vegetable gardens in which food is shared. We will need to move to more to have more resilience in front of the crisis that might come in front of us. We'll have to also have ways of producing, be more self-reliant. Produce our own food, producing our own electricity, and these communities is a way to do it. That not single family can be able to produce everything they need, but a community actually can produce, food and energy and all the things that
Totally.
they need. And we're seeing here, for example, in California, there were a lot of blackouts, with PG&E in the center of technology and the future of humanity, supposedly Silicon Valley. We saw the lack of resilience of the electric grid, right? So as climate change continues manifesting in natural disasters and situations like that, having resilience, community living is going to become more and more a reality and a possibility, or a necessity,
So
actually.
I love to hear that. I have heard a lot of friends wanting to um, live in like communal houses.
Hmm.
And then like you also have like permaculture communities. I was
Hmm.
talking to someone in Peru the other day about how they have one outside of Iquitos, um, which is, I want to, I agree. This is really appealing
Yeah,
to me.
and we were talking before about consumption and buying things. So here where I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we are building a community that is just 6 or 7 houses, and we're gonna grow it to more houses of people who are all friends with each other. And we say, hey, I have a chainsaw. If you need a chainsaw, don't buy one, just ask for mine, right?
Mhm.
And I have this other thing, and we're like just trying to share resources, because that's the way to not have to buy so many stuff, right? um,
Yeah. And what's so funny is like, this is not new.
right, right.
Like this is like us relearning. Like we got so far. That's how we always were, like society, our parents, our grandparents. And then we got so far into this individual, I can consume, I can fend for myself, da, da, da. And then all this waste happens, all this degradation, all this
Yeah.
extraction, all this separation, all this loneliness. It's
Hmm.
not just about us being consumers and wasting money and wasting like and feeling like we're going to be satisfied by something we'll never be satisfied because material will never satisfy you. It's also about how freaking lonely are you? Like
Right.
when we have communities who don't care for the elderly and like we're all going to get old, God willing, like
Mm.
wouldn't you want to feel like you could not feel like a burden to someone? Like I'm living with my grandparents right now. They're 80 and 83 and it's awesome. Like I I had a lot of visions of them when I went on this trip back in December, and I'm like, I felt called to like come and stay with them for a time. Um, and I think it's just wonderful. And actually, they take care of me so much. It's kind of living the life, but
Mm.
yeah, it's lonely. And we're just relearning things. And I'm glad that I get to live with them because they're teaching me things.
Hmm.
Like I'm realizing, oh yeah, like you grew up in Cuba, like you grew up doing things in a completely different way. Like my grandma, whenever the toothpaste is out, she cuts the end of it and then like scoops out the toothpaste.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, we used to do that in
so
Argentina.
yeah, just pretending like we're coming up with new solutions, but we're not. Although this permaculture and eco living communities sounds pretty cool. So we've talked about a lot of things. I love this that we started off talking about individual healing and now talking about how we can heal together.
Hmm.
Um, Before we go, Diego, what are some of the things that you think about a lot in this theme that you wish you could see more of?
Yeah, I mean, everything we've been talking about, I do think a lot about systemic thinking applied to this, and there's not going to be an individual solution, a one solution. You know, we love to have a silver bullet and like the solution to climate change, the solution to coronavirus. It's not like that. You know, it's there's going to
Yeah,
be a lot of different things that we're going to have to do. And yes, most importantly is to start from within, finding peace on yourself, integrating your own self, so that from there you can start expanding that into the world, and and then system thinking applied to how we redesign civilization for the 22nd century, so that next generations can inherit this beautiful jewel of planet Earth, and not only humanity, but all the non-human species that live in this planet that have been around for thousands of years, for millions of years, like these trees, that are from the
yeah,
Paleolithic. How do we keep this beautiful jewel evolving? That's some of the things that I think a lot about.
yeah.
Then, of course, in reality, I think a lot about how I'm gonna make my company successful, how I'm gonna make it work. And in this case,
Mm,
when you find alignment between what you do with this higher purpose of regenerating the planet is great, because just by working very hard on your very focused part of your contribution, then you're contributing to a larger cause.
well, thank you so much, Diego. Thank you for coming and joining me on the podcast. I hope you come back again soon so we can riff off of some of the
I
things.
enjoy it. It's these are conversations that we have in private, so it's cool to
Yeah,
open source it and to
yeah.
share this with other people that might be interested in our ramblings. And I do think it's a great idea what we spoke before of opening up for more diverse voices. Right? We need, I sent you a few South American shamans that we could invite here to your podcast, and artists, storytellers, teachers, healers, and we need to bring those voices into this conversation. So keep it up,
Wait,
and
do that.
thank you for
Thank,
inviting me.
thank you. We'll do that.
Okay,
And for anybody else, if you have suggestions on people that you would love to see on the podcast, you can write an email to peopleplanetpodcast, all one word, at gmail.com. So peopleplanetpodcast at gmail.com. Thanks and talk to you next time.